Welcome. Thinking we need to do better about getting our board members here. Not to throw anyone under the bus, but a couple of us are here. We had a really big turnout last month, and I just happened to assume that it was going to be that way all the time. So I feel like maybe spring fever has hit, but nonetheless, we want to thank our speaker and his wife for being here tonight. And we're going to go forward anyhow, as if it doesn't matter, because it's a great topic, and I think you're going to agree with me once we get underway. So tonight's speaker is, excuse me, let me pause right there. Tonight's speaker is, I want to say Reverend Ted, because that's what it says on your website, right? Or your email, Reverend Ted. But I don't want to be presumptuous. Retired Reverend. Yeah. Ted Carroll is with us tonight. He's going to speak on Echoes from Catawba, and these are his recollections of growing up with the people, places, and culture of the Catawba Valley. I'm going to pause too and say I put all this effort into making sure we had microphone support, but everybody's up towards the front. I don't think we really need it. But let me just take a minute and just give myself some props for doing a microphone tonight, because we've never had one. Not at all. It's sort of rumbly though. If I turn that off.
No, use it.
You need it? Very good. This is good information. Thank you very much. And that makes a big difference, doesn't it? Perfect. Well, we will keep doing this. I want to thank our staff too. Kelly Robertson and Ashley Webb, who put in more time and effort than we will ever know. And I'm going to bring Ashley up here now to give us some highlights of what's happening around the museum.
Yes, thank you all again for coming tonight. If you did not grab a sheet on your way in, please do so. It has all of our upcoming events on it. Just a few to name, to mark your calendars for. Next Tuesday, May 2nd, we do have a closing reception and a gallery talk with our artist, Brett Legoo. He's going to be talking about all the works that he has created during his residency with the Art of Place. So be sure to mark your calendar for that. That is 6 to 8. We'll have the meet and greet from 6 to 7, and then Brett will speak from 7 to 8. On May 13th, we are doing a Norfolk and Western Architectural History walking tour with Kelly. And that is going to be at 11 a.m., free for members, $5 for non-members, and let Kelly know, or let front desk person know, give us a call if you want to attend that. We do have limited spots, and we'll meet at the museum for that. On May 18th, we are doing a day trip to Versailles, which is a historic home in Nelson County, and your ticket is, if you're a member, it's $95. For a non-member, it's $110. And that will include your bus ride up, a box lunch, a ticket to explore the house, the outbuildings, and potentially the grounds. It's a working peony farm, and I'm kind of nervous because the peonies at my house have already started to bloom, so I'm hoping they'll still be in bloom on the 18th. But if you have not signed up for that, please do so. Those are available on our website. You can stop in, give us a call, and take care of that as well. Again, that's May 18th. And then on May 23rd, we are doing our next Kegley Lecture series with Dr. Mills Kelly, and he's going to be speaking about Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail, and that will be here at 7 p.m. So that's what's coming up in May, so mark your calendars, and we'll see you all then. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen.
And May is National Preservation Month.
It is. Did not know that.
So that's a good for your house tour.
Oh, perfect, good.
For those of you in the cheap seats, we're talking up front about the May being Preservation Month. I'm just trying to stretch it out here. It's just how, yeah. Now I wanted to check out how the microphone sound is working. I really like these speakers. I think it really is good. And we got some feedback from the last lecture that for some folks it's difficult to hear. Like I like to yell sometimes and think that everybody can hear that, but that's not always the case. So thank you, Ashley. And just a reminder that to make a brief pitch for membership. I always like to do that, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here. It looks like everybody's probably a member, but we want to make sure we spread the word about that. We're under, what's the right word? We've been going through a visioning and mission branding rebuilding phase as a board, and to chart the course for the next 10 years. And one of the big areas of hope and interest and emphasis will be membership. So we're trying to build that up, and one of the ways to do that is to talk about it here and amongst yourselves with your friends. That's something that we're doing. And also, just a reminder that Christ Lutheran, this site, is going to be the site of all the lectures moving forward. Unless, of course, we throw in another lecture that's specific to the Link Museum auditorium. And we may be able to do that during the summer months. But for right now, the fellowship hall here at Christ Lutheran will be home base, as it always has been, for the Kegley Lecture series. We will take a summer hiatus, so we'll do May, as Ashley said, and then we'll take off until we'll come back in September. And we'll do September, October, November. All right. And you mentioned Dr. Mills Kelly. Well, I want to talk about our speaker. I first found out about his work when I was over at the Salem Museum and found their display of his hardbacks. And they're just really incredible. There's nothing else like them out there. And as I was talking to him earlier tonight, that's exactly why he committed to writing this. There is no other existing Catawba Valley history. There's snippets here and there, and there's certainly news articles that you could gather up and compile, but there's nothing in one place. And so for that fact alone, he deserves kudos, but I think the nature of the stories is even better because it's from a real familial approach. I want to read from his bio. Ted Carroll was born in Catawba to a mother who was the 17th and last child of William and Luema Garman. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Who settled there in 1889. So his family goes way back. But I thought it was more impressive that she was of a family of 17 siblings. That is really huge. We don't do that anymore. Mr. Carroll is a graduate of Andrew Lewis High School and earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from Virginia Tech. He retired from Tech after 25 years of service as a member of the Extension faculty. From 1982 to 1990, Mr. Carroll served 4 terms as the mayor of the town of Orange, Virginia. After leaving Orange in 1990, he answered the call to become an ordained minister. He pastored a church in North Carolina for 14 years before he and his wife Tina returned to Virginia in 2019. Ted began writing his accounts of Catawba in early 2018 with the goal of preserving the history of the Catawba Valley, focusing on its people, culture, and places. Tonight, retired Reverend Ted will share true stories from his 4-book series, Echoes from Catawba, as he shares what it was like growing up in this beautiful Appalachian community, being surrounded by the oral tradition which stretches back to the early 1900s and beyond. Let's give Mr. Carroll a hand.
Thank you. Tina, can you turn my bottom? Good. Okay, now, what we're going to do, you've been seeing this video. I want you to see it again, and it'll be some voiceovers. And pay attention to one of my cousins that has a, different kind of accent. And another one sounds, what can I say, normal. But it'll be interesting. Kind of pay attention to some of the background, some of the people that you see there. It's just kind of a short video of we're promoting something, and we have longer ones, but I like to have this to kind of get you in focus of what we're going to be talking about. That's me right there on the right.
available for Daddy to have work with him. I went to work with him when I was 16, I believe. I just quit school because, you know, back in the days, the money wasn't too plentiful and stuff was bad, so I just went to work down there and they paid me $1 a day. So I just watched after him and done a little cooking and ironing and stuff like that. Yeah, Mama used to make our clothes out of feed sack. That was good, and our shoes, if a sole come off of them, Daddy would cut up an old inner tube or something and fix our shoes for us. But back then, people didn't laugh at you what you wore or anything, because they was about in the same boat. Every fall of the year, we slept on straw mattresses, and Daddy would take them and put new straw in them, and we thought that was the best thing it ever was.
Oh.
But we never did complain. That we knew that things was, you know, we was having a hard time and everything. It was a good life. I'd like to live it over again.
That's just a little appetizer. Particularly the ladies in the picture, the little girls with the dresses and so forth. And so, well, that's not unusual. What's different? Probably all of those pictures were made from feed sacks that where we got our material to make things, and much of the clothing was homemade. You got a little bit picture of that. Now the lady that was talking with a kind of an accent and used to iron clothes, you know, she was talking about working at the general store there. The general store was Minor Keffer's store, and if you've ever been to the home place, you would have, for a meal, then you would have passed that store. And of course, it's more modern now, but the man who sold the home place property, that house up on the hill, actually was Captain W.W. Brand, and he sold that to the Morgans in around 1907, and Brands had actually been part owners of the old store, which was a log building and so forth. So anyway, I just wanted you to see a little bit, and the two little boys in the lane with the old Model A tires or something. Of course, we call them tars, you know. We did not believe in syllables. You know, if you could say something without using syllables.
That's right.
Like, well, what were you doing this morning? Not this morning, this morning. And we had, that's a Scott-Irish, I do believe, coming out. And so we had our own kind of language. It was different. I can remember reflecting on that when I was a sophomore at Andrew Lewis High School. My English teacher talked to me one day privately, which was nice. She said, well, Ted, you know, we're going to have to do something to get rid of that mountain slang you got if you're going to go out in the world and get, you know, be successful. And I said, well, Miss Dayton, I didn't know I had a mountain slang. And the thing that I think I remember the most as I look back is how different it was in my lifetime. Of course, we're in a post-modern world right now. And so you go back to this time, and some of you can remember these days, or had your parents or grandparents, the changes. I could write a book just on things that happened back then, the way they were, and the way they are now. It would be quite interesting, particularly for millennials and Gen Z people, at least. Anyway, I'm so glad to be here tonight, and and to be with people that are preservation-minded and do not want yet to cash in all the experiences that you've had in your life, that you can learn something about people who grew up in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, when I did these books, and I started doing lectures and promos and so forth, and, which I love to do, it was just a situation to where I wanted people to understand that, yeah, we were often referred to by other people that lived in Roanoke and Salem as those people over Catawba, you know. And I wasn't offended at that. I'm just glad they realized there's people in Catawba. And so what I wanted to achieve and what motivated me, not too long after I left Catawba to go out into the world, and adjusted because there was nothing. I didn't know anything out in the world could faze me after spending 22 years in the mountains and living that kind of life. So I met a man. His name was James Cortada. He was a part of. He was an attaché specializing in financial matters on a team that would go out in different countries. His was spent most of the time in Cuba. He kind of took me under his wing. He was a mayor of Orange, Virginia, where I spent 25 years, and was the one that caused me to be mayor. I didn't want to be mayor. I told him, I don't want to be mayor. And he says, yeah, you got to do that. And then he told me, he said, you need to write 2 books in your lifetime, one nonfiction and one fiction, at least, And it turns out that's, I kind of, if I could talk to him today, and I can't because he's deceased, but I would say, well, I wrote these books, they're nonfiction historical books, but everybody says, did you make it up? Did you take some liberties? Did you, this sounds like fiction. Well, I can understand that. It really does to people who have not experienced that kind of growing up. But as I went through the years living out in the world, I kept being brought back to my time in Catawba. It's like you take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. Well, I didn't have a slang. I didn't, spit tobacco on the sidewalks or anything like that. But I adjusted. I mean, my old college professor told me, he said, Brother Carroll, when you go out in the world, you go have to adjust or adjourn. That's pretty good advice, even today. So I kept thinking about those days in Catawba. In 1980, I remember I wrote, I'd call them essays. They were about a page and a half. And I sent them out to different newspapers, including Southern Living. I shall aim high and take whatever's left on the ground, Everything in the world is not low-hanging fruit. So no one would do it except this farming country kind of tabloid, I guess you'd call it, up in Culpeper County, Virginia. That's where it's originated. So I sent to them, and they loved my articles, and so can't pay you. And I said, you mean I could have been paid for this? I just wanted to do it, so I wrote them, and I kept those with me all those years in a folder, all different kinds of topics of things that I had experienced in Catawba, probably a couple dozen. They'd been printing those, and I was getting good feedback on that, and then they just could not financially handle publishing that, even without paying me. They still didn't have any money. So that ended, but I kept those. It was called Carroll's Country Chatter. And so when I started thinking about writing, I'll tell you what the motivation was there in a minute. I had those articles there to start with. So anyway, when I was preaching for 14, 15 years, a little more than that when I do guest preaching, and come back here to Virginia in 2019, and the Methodists pulled their preacher out of Catawba Valley, the home church for my family and all these people you're seeing, at Shiloh Church up in the upper end of Catawba. I preached there for 13 months. It's kind of funny because that church property was donated by my great-grandfather, Adam Garman, his wife, and it was to be used for the Protestant, or for Methodist, Baptist, Episcopalian, or any other organized denomination. So when the Methodists pulled their preacher out of there, there I sat in the congregation, because we were going there when we got back from Greensboro, and I was a Baptist. Actually, the Methodist hierarchy, I guess, here running it was going to lock the door and hold us in contempt, you know, have us arrested or whatever. So we went to them. I didn't, the people in the church did. Said, well, we're going to be Baptists from now on. And that was just until all this ended. And so I preached for 13 months, loved it. Everybody in there I was kin to, you know, or, you know, after you talk with them and preach to them for 2 or 3 weeks, you're kin to them anyhow, by association. Anyway, I was talking to Tina one day when we were in Greensboro. I guess it was around 2017, and I said, I want to write. I want to write my memoirs. I said, I want to write about Catawba. I want to write about that. And I said, did a little research, see what was been done in Catawba. Nothing. There was not anything there. Now there were some articles. Usually when you talk about Catawba, your mindset in many cases goes to Catawba over in North Carolina. There's Catawba there, Catawba County, Catawba School, College, Catawba this, Catawba that. And so, you know, we're just the little Catawba, so to speak. Both places were named after Catawba Indians. And I verified that because I read one article. It went way back with a really good writer. But he said that it was a mystery. He said it's been a mystery forever how Catawba got its name. Well, I'm like, duh. You got Catawba Creek, Catawba Mountain, Catawba whatever. Does every Catawba? And I said, okay, now what else could be a Catawba? And I looked that up. I mean, I went to some ridiculous lengths to find out the word Catawba. And everywhere I went, it's an Indian tribe, which I knew. And so then I just did some deductive reasoning, or like if it looks like a duck, acts like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And so I did go get into the files of the people in South Carolina where the headquarters of the Catawba Indian tribe are, and that was confirmed. And so I did. That was one thing I was kind of pleased with. That, you know, we're legitimate. So I wanted to write my memoirs. Well, Tina, who is advanced in the computer business, she does all of the formatting, all the putting the pictures in these books, everything, which saves us a lot of money because we're a nonprofit. Now, I don't mean by law or anything. I mean, we just don't make money on the books. And we knew that. We were going to use our own resources to be able to do this. And she would handle everything except the printing, which you would get them printed in a professional printer, of course, but other than that. So we were going to try a blog, and we did for a little while. It was sort of like writing for that paper in Culpeper, that wasn't going to be short. That was going to be short-lived. So I was writing these articles, and you know, after 4, 5, or 6, people were liking them and all that stuff, you know, and it was going really, really well. And I'm like, well, why am I doing it? Why don't I just write a book and put articles in the book, and then people can buy the books and spread it around. A lot of people sending us gifts and so forth. So that's when we decided to write. Now, we were in Greensboro, so for 2018, which was the first book, we would drive up here, spend like a Friday and Saturday to get off from her job, and we would interview people in Catawba. Then we had to get back to Greensboro for Sunday because I was preaching. And so that went on all of 2018, and some interviews I would do with kinfolk out in the USA, different places. I would get on the phone and have a recorder and talk for sometimes up to an hour. It's very strenuous work because you're going to someone's house and you're interviewing. Usually it was more than one there. You usually have a brother and a couple sisters that were talking about their life and so forth, and getting it on tape, and then going back and Tina, you know, transcribing that into words. And then I did the manuscripts. I don't type. This little finger right here it's arthritic, not from writing, from milking cows. I did all 4 of these books with this little fella right here. Honestly, I did. And I forget how many words a minute, but it went to, well, here are the books, are you? We got it done. So anyway, I decided that instead of writing my memoirs, it is to make all these visits with all the people. There's a lot of them in Catawba. Now that first line of people, which would have been, you saw the grandparents there, Will Garman and Lou Emma, my grandparents, and all those 17 children, you know, they're all gone now. My mother, I guess she was the last one in the family and last one to pass on. So then I was looking at the next layer or level, which would have been first cousins, grandchildren. Was 66 of us to start with, of them. I wouldn't be part of that additional 66, and there's 20 now, and mostly, I think there's 4 of us guys and 16 ladies, and a number of them are upper 90s and still going strong, 80s, you know, 85, 87, 89, and so there's a lot of people that I had access to that I couldn't talk to their mother and father, which would have been my aunts and uncles, but they had all this information, particularly those that stayed there and lived there and still do. A lot of them moved on, you know, into Roanoke and Salem or even beyond. So I wanted to let them tell me about the life I lived through their eyes and their voices. And they did. And now some things I didn't know. I couldn't know everything about everybody in Catawba. And so this was just a real great situation. The lady on here was my cousin that talked about, you know, she quit school. She was working at that store and taking care of the owner's young son. That's what she said, when she got paid $1 a day, and she cooked and ironed clothes and so forth. Well, in talking to them and talking to all these people, it's like someone was speaking to me about how it was in Catawba and how it lived, which would include myself. It was very, very strange feeling. But Betty, that's her name, I was trying to think of her name. Betty is the one that has the slang or the accent. She was asked there at the end, if you recall, she is up and volunteered. I had her on the phone, and that was a miracle because she did not believe in talking on the phone. She's in Kentucky, and she made that comment that you heard that I would do it over again. You know, she made that comment. Well, I've been asked that, you know, after all these, not recently, but well, when I was into probably the second book. Well, would you do it over again? And I'd get, you know, get sort of a lump in my throat, and feel just tears in the eyes, and I'd just tell them, "Are you kidding me? Are you serious?" And then I would come back with, well, actually, by writing these books and interviewing, I don't know how many people, how many hours, I did go back. I lived it again. And now I can record it for everyone else that would relate to this, would live it over again. One thing I ran into was, Mr. Carroll, that's really great what you did, but I don't know anybody in that book. I'm not kidding. That's your kin. And I never had that before. This was actually over in Newcastle, Virginia. It was over there. We've talked over there a couple of times. Sold a lot of books over there because Craig County is just, those of you who've been there, he said you go through Catawba to get to Craig, and past that, the sign says end of the world. Really? So, you know, it kind of took me aback. And then I thought, well, you know, you go to a movie, what's your favorite movie? Gone with the Wind or something like that. Well, did you enjoy that? Yeah, it was great. Were you kin to anybody in that movie? Do you love certain kind of music, the words, the old hymns and things? Oh yeah. Are you kin to, Bill Gaither or no? Well, you don't need to be kin well, two things. One is anybody in the southern Appalachians, once you get out of the Pennsylvania Dutch area in the upper Shenandoah Valley, it's a little different, I would say. And you get down deep into Virginia and you get into coal mining, it's a little deep, but living a life and eating and surviving and so forth is common to everybody. So this would fit anybody in the 25 million people that live in Appalachia right now. Plus, we found out that a lot of people, and there might be somebody here tonight that just never knew anything about Catawba, and it's just interesting. It's information. It's helping. I feel like we should have been recognized, all the immigrants that came in to form that boundary between the indigenous people there, because the Indians were, they were upset about people coming down that great wagon road and killing their animals that they relied on for food and getting on into their territory. And that was the incentive, if you studied that part of history, that in Virginia, particularly, because that's what we're talking about now, but throughout there, Virginia actually gave incentives for the immigrants to come from Ireland or from wherever they would come from, but we're talking about the Irish here particularly, that if you come here, we'll give you, it's almost like giving you free property. You can have 40 acres. I don't know about the mule or not, but you can have 40 acres. And if you stayed there for a few years, then you didn't have to pay anything on it. So there was incentives. And the reason for that was that they knew that you don't mess with the Irish. You don't mess with them. So if you've got them lined up, if you picture Catawba, the foot of Catawba Mountain, or anywhere where the mountains end, they end further, south than that, that you had a band of people living there that would fight the Indians to protect the people in the big houses and the big properties in the Piedmont area that goes down along below the mountain area. And then you get out into the coastal plains or the sand hills. Now that's all the people, the pilgrims, the colonists. They have all that property, and they should, because they got here first and settled. So we were there for a purpose, but there was an impact of the Irish in the Revolutionary War, particularly in certain battles. They brought their own music. They made their instruments when they got here, except the accordion. They didn't make the accordion, but that was a popular instrument. The music was in their minds, in their hearts, and their souls. They came for one thing, and that was to own land, be independent, and worship God. So when they come, and this is, I brought it out in this book, this #1 book, that the first thing they did was build a house. Now, when Catawba was settled, my grandparents got married in '89 and had the first child in 1990, and then the rest of them, Grandma had, in 24 years, she had 17 children. And I got some stories in here. It was more in a family than that. That wasn't the biggest family. 19 was the biggest family in Catawba. So these are the people that would build their homes, build their barns, build their schools, build their stills, and make a living. Reason for the big families, they needed workers. Now, the two ladies over here that talked were part of a family. There was 5 girls in the family, and they had to work. The two of the girls in that family were twins, and they were very bright and industrious. They went on to Andrew Lewis and got to the junior year and doing well in school, A's and B's, and their father was managing a farm. That's how he made his living, how he raised his family and paid for things. And so they quit school just to work on the farm. And it was a remark about a lot of the boys were in World War II, were gone. And so the women really were the key, and more so, I think, than the men. But the first book, it tells about all of these people, the 17 children. Now, not all of them married. One died in World War I. A baby died at age 2, just never was well. And a young boy, 9 years old, got killed in a farm accident. Then the other 14 had families. And so the first one, let's talk about the first one, give you a perspective here on the longevity. The first one was named Gertrude. She was born in 1990. She would go on and get married in her 20s, and she would raise 4 daughters. One of those daughters had 13 children, and a couple of them had 9, and I think the 5th one, or the 4th one, had 7. So then you come on down, and then there's an Oscar Garment. He was one of the males, one of the first males to be born. So he got married, met a woman, moved to Roanoke, and raised 14 children. And you just come on down, there's 9 children. I was in a family of 5. It was 5 of us, me and, and so you had in that list of 14 who got married. The first one, very first one, the longevity gene kicked in. She lived to be 102 and a half. Well, you drop on down to the 10th one that was born into that family. She got the longevity gene. She lived to be 108 and a half. Drop on down to 13, and she lived to be just 18 days short of 109, right? 109. And then my old mama, she lived to be 103 and a half. Now, if you think about the longevity genes, I'm not high on genetics and everything, but my understanding is it passes from a woman to a daughter more so than it would a son. And so Grandma, the very first one, lived to be over 100, 102 and a half. Then all the way down to my mama. And that gene was hanging in there, you know, really good. So, but it just left us with a huge family. Now, when you combine those two families of the Garmans, and then remember, Gertrude had the one that had 13 kids, and then Oscar moved to Roanoke, but he still had 14 children. That's a village and a half right there. Now, there were other families. It wasn't just Garmans and Martins. They were sort of like Hatfields and McCoys, only they didn't fight like that. But it was two dominant families, and they're all spread around today, here, there, and everywhere. So that kind of sets the stage here of what this book is about, and some really, really good stories. Now, the lady that lived to be 18 days short of 109 was the 13th born in that family, and she took a primitive life called a Granny Taylor of Possum Holler, and all that's true. Of course, every area has a Possum Holler. So the reason I wrote this book on her was because she just didn't fit into this book as one of the 17. Because when she got married, she lived a primitive life for all of her life. Now, she reached the age of 103, lived alone, had an outhouse. Her only run-in water was you'd run down to the spring and run back. She didn't have any bad. Well, her daughters, as they got older, moved into town. They bought her a complete bathroom set, everything you need, the basin and sink and commode and everything. It's still sitting over there in the barn on her property, although she's gone. One of her grandsons owns the property. It's over there. If anybody's looking for it, it's probably antique by now. So she did. Well, in 103, she was over there, come big snow, about 20-inch snow down in Possum Holler. She could not stand to have snow out there deep between her house and the road. She just had this paranoia about, how am I going to get out of here if I have to get out of here? Where are you going to go in the snow? So she went out with a shoveled a path out to the road, which would have been from here out to the parking lot here down a ways, and came back, cleaned off the porch, went inside, and of course, she was 103 years old now. Imagine that. And she went inside and slipped and fell. Well, people were calling her to check on her because of the snow. And no answer. So one of the guys went over there and found her, and she's laying there, and she was conscious and everything, but broken hip. And she told him, the guy there was that checked on her, said, well, just carry me in there, put me on the bed, and give me aspirin. And he said, no, the rescue squad will be here soon. And so they took her out at age 103. She was in hospital for quite a while. Then she lived with one of her daughters in Salem, and she never went back. My mom and I visited her one day when I was up from Greensboro, and we went in to see her, and we sat out on the couch, and she said, well, I called Snyder Nursing Home and talked to them, made arrangements. I'm checking myself in. And like, what? And that, she did. So they were going to let her, she was be able to go and get checked in a couple of weeks. And she lived there and entertained the whole place until she died, as we talked about it, at age almost 109 years. But she was something else. So I wrote a book about her. Just I hadn't intended to do that, but she was so unique and so special. And this has been probably the bestseller. And people have buying it as an inspiration book. We've had people call from West Coast who said, well, a lady called from Oregon or Washington, and she got on the Google box, thing, and said, an inspirational book for a lady that is hurting. She had a kinfolk or a friend in North Carolina, and so they sent her some books, titles, choices, any one of these 6 or 7, whatever it was, and she picked this book, and she got the book, ordered it from us, and then she read it, and she just was overwhelmed, and she sent it on to her friend as an inspirational book. Now, the third book, I want to move along here. The third book was, I featured the silent killer, which was, the silent killer in the mountains was tuberculosis. And then we had epilepsy and polio were the other two. TB. So the state built the first hospital in Virginia in Catawba Valley because of the purity of the air, the mountain atmosphere and things that people could do. And that happened in 2009. Prior to that, it was a Red Sulphur Springs, where some people from Salem were running a businessman and created Red Sulphur Springs over there. Those things popped up in the Appalachians at that time, and the sulfur water and so forth. And there was supposed to be healing powers. So I put that in here because my dad got sick at age, I was 3.5 years old. He was diagnosed. He was working at the hospital, running a little store. Prior to that, he worked on the farm. My grandfather managed that farm, dairy farm. And so the state bought that, and Dad ended up there when I was 3 or so, and I was 13 when he got out. So, and I had 3 sisters and Mama, and it was the odd boy out. It just wasn't enough room in the house. So I became a little George Washington. I slept in a lot of different places with kinfolk. I mean, tell you, even with my grandmother over in Salem on a fall of the year on a screen porch on the 2nd level. But thank God that I'd grown up in Catawba. It was always cold anyhow, so it didn't bother me that much. But the final book, this is sort of some interviews I talk about. I was really disappointed when the home place had to close down. I'm very close to that family. I worked on that farm as a youngster. That led me into studying agriculture, animal science at Virginia Tech. We were people who you would love. You just would do anything for you. The selfless people believed in hard work, believed in church. A church was the recreational gathering place all the time that I grew up there. And no one ever went hungry, even during the Depression. I wasn't there during the Depression, but the fallout. And just, you would stop at someone's house if you were, like we had people that would be walking looking for jobs, that just men, and they'd be walking up a road, and you could tell they carried a sack on their back, and not homeless as such, but just look, and so you give them a meal, supper and breakfast, and let them sleep in the barn, give them a blanket, sleep on that. Oh, maybe it's like a straw tick when you heard from the thing up there. So when I look at our culture, I think about, and I'll close with this little story. And I could talk about it so much more, but it's just you cannot do that in a setting, and my voice is starting to fade. Also, I had read, and I reread that today, that in the 1800s, the latter part of the 1800s, the New York Times sent a young lady down to the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia to write an article on the culture of those people, my people. So she did, and she got back very frustrated when she got back to New York, and what did you come up with? And she said, nothing. She said, they talk funny, they eat strange things, possum, other things. They have no etiquette at all. And she said, well, he said, well, wasn't there something there? She said, they don't have a culture. They're not cultured people. They don't have cultures for me to write about. And I remember reading that and thinking, well, this was during my writing time on these books. I said, yeah, we did. It might not be like people in the then town of Salem or city of Roanoke or, God forbid, New York City. But, we've been perceived for years in that light, and I'm not complaining or making an issue about that. I understand the diverse situation between us and others, but we had one of my cousins went in the Air Force, and he spent his career, he flew for 4 presidents. He was the pilot and flying them around. I went to college, we drove back and forth, took turns with two brothers who I'm kin to, the Wright brothers, not the ones you're thinking about. But actually, one of them that was my age went to work for one of the big outfits out west, Boeing or somebody like that. And he wrote a manual about that thick. I saw it one time on the moving parts of some big airplane. I can't remember. He was brilliant. His brother, who was older, worked with the TVA authority, when the Holston Dam was built and the water came to Tennessee. He would testify before Congress and things of that nature. And so we had people that, regardless if they just were those people from Catawba and had no culture in some people's eyes, we had people who could be successful, very successful. We had them in the wars, in particular World War II. And what it did for me and the experiences I've had, which my final book will be written on my life, then I'm much better prepared now to do that. And I don't need to live that life again. I live in the Catawba district of Roanoke County, so that's close enough. But it just, it's been a wonderful experience. And the people I can share it with, and I appreciate your being here tonight and your attentiveness. And hope that you can relate in some way or another. Maybe you have thoughts and stories inside of you that have been passed down from your ancestors. I usually like to close with, could I take 2 or 3 questions?
Yes, please.
So if you have specific questions, or anything that I've said that you would want me to clarify, or
I'm curious about your comments about the Scotch-Irish connection, and what do you think what it was about Catawba that made the Irish and Scottish immigrants stop there and just set up their homestead? Obviously it's a beautiful place. Was it farming? Was it hunting, or all of the above, or was it mining, or economic opportunity?
It's a couple things. First of all, it was land. It was land. They came down that 600-mile trip, and they were later on in the 1700s. It started in the late 1600s. So the Shenandoah Valley was already taken. The Germans in Pennsylvania, the Dutch. Have you heard? We just heard this recently. Pennsylvania Dutch are not Dutch. It was a German pronunciation. It's Deutsch or something like. Am I correct on that? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? That's all I know. So go home and come. But I think mainly they had been treated so badly by King William when they were Scots, taken out of the lower lands of Scotland, put up in Ulster. You couldn't even sprout a potato hardly, and so they just give us a chance. You know, like you walk up to the Indian and you say to the Indian, how, and the Indian says, I know how, just give me a chance. That's kind of what the Scotch-Irish wanted. They wanted freedom.
The other question I had was the slide behind you just there was McAfee's Knob. Is that named for is that a Scottish? That sure sounds Scottish. Scots-Irish to me. Where did McAfee's Knob get named
Yes,
from?
indeed, and very much so, named after James McAfee, who's credited and in Roanoke County history, D.D. We believe there were some early settlers, but this is not. You got to go with facts. And McAfee was certainly the biggest landowner, and right down underneath that, so it was named after him, McAfee Knob. And I have people go there, day trips or Appalachian Trail. I would guess that I was out that way walking, hunting, or standing on there. It would be several hundred times.
Well, I certainly went through there a bunch in the Boy Scouts growing up. It's Catawba. You got to go through Catawba to get to all the good hiking and camping destinations. So in the store, the picture of Keffer's store there, we always stopped in there for provisions or whatnot. So.
The Scotch-Irish were the ideal ethnicity to come when they did and to form that barrier until the Indians come. I have a great heart for the Indians, indigenous people. They had plenty of land, yes, but it should have been handled differently so that they could have, rather than battle. But the role in the Revolutionary War, I think, changed the war. I could make a case for that because of the fighting spirit. People who have that Irish background, ancestry, those people, they've been through it all. You know, tough.
Any other questions?
I would say that also, it looks like Ireland. When you go to Ireland and Germany, and when you come down the valley, you think you're in Germany. When you come on to Botany County and Craig and that part of Roanoke County, which was Botany County, when you're talking about it, for that early part, it looks like Ireland. Not exactly, but I can see that it would be familiar.
It felt like home.
A little bit like home.
Yeah, the resemblance is there. Makes you want to yodel. Makes you want to yodel.
Not me.
Yes, sir.
I saw a picture of a girls' basketball team. On their jerseys, they had CHS. Was there a high school up there?
Catawba High School was built in 1928. That was my mama on the end there. She was holding the basketball. And the story was that she was top scorer on the team. That's when they used to have an offense on one end, defense on the other. And Mama was a ball hawk. She wouldn't give up. That's how come she scored 44 points in one game. She's telling me.
Is this the high school building?
It's still over there. That's when you cross the mountain to go to the home place, or you come up to Keffer Store, the old store there, general store. That big brick building sits there. My home, when I was at home living there, is right beside the school. And I tell people I walked back and forth to school for all 7 grades through all kinds of weather. I never told them that it was 32 seconds from my house. Yes, sir.
So after the settlers got this land, what were the crops that they grow? Do you have any idea of what they were growing mostly?
Yeah, they would clear land to grow grass, grow hay.
Okay.
And they grew corn. The corn was big to feed, particularly hogs. So they would grow huge gardens, but usually, like, my grandma was in charge of the garden, and the girls, and the other, but the girls, once they got teenagers, they'd be out in the field carrying hay bales or something. They grew some grain.
Right.
I was just going to attest to the character of people from Catawba. I'm from Northern Virginia, and one of my first teaching jobs was at Northside High School. And we had a snow day, but it wasn't that bad, so people came in, and one of my students came in late, so I was going to turn him in. But he was coming from Catawba and had shoveled 3 driveways just to help out his neighbors before he came to school. So I had to walk him through and get him excused for that. But that, to me, I learned about my students from Catawba.
Yeah, and that's a great example.
He was a great kid.
Get me better.
At the sanatorium, were most of the employees there from Catawba, or did they drive in from Roanoke and Salem?
Well, mostly from Catawba, and actually, the sanatorium put Catawba on the map. The home place created a destination. But people in Catawba, they worked there, and they were the best employees anywhere they worked. If they come over here and worked, row furniture and places like that, it was all we ever heard from the owners and the people of those businesses. We want to hire Catawba people because they're on time and they work hard. That was just part of your makeup, part of our culture.
Any other questions? Well, we want to thank you for being here tonight.